Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this live webinar brought to you by the BIBF and powered by El Salam Bank. We are delighted to have you on board this virtual forum, now resuming with the Managing Director of ICAS MENA, Mr. Paul Firth, who will shed light on the importance of mental health in the workplace. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Jamal. Let me just get my slides up onto the screen. If I just introduce myself, my name's Paul Firth. I'm the Managing Director for a company called ICAS, for the ICAS MENA region. Based out of Dubai, we cover across the MENA region in 17 countries. What I'll do is run through a number of slides. I think what you'll find is some similarities and some common themes that are coming out following the excellent presentations from Alex, David and Martin. And hopefully I could just add some additional thoughts and ideas and some of the experiences that we're seeing through ICAS and our EAP services that we deliver locally here. Just as a bit of background as to who ICAS is, because you may not have heard of us. We're one of the leading global EAP providers. We've been around for over 30 years now. We're a UK registered company, and we provide global EAP services. So that's services that provide a range of professional support tools to employees, primarily including sort of 24/7 telephonic counselling, face-to-face counselling, access to lawyers and financial advisors for financial and legal guidance, management coaching, people skills coaching skills for line managers, and then wellness coaching, so access to nutritionists, exercise coach and life coaches, and then a range of online tools. And the whole idea about what we offer is to provide fully funded by the employers, employees with free access to these support tools. So how important is mental health in the workplace? Well, I have to say, before we experienced COVID, mental health in the workplace was always important and has always been an area that has been growing as a challenge for business. And I think what we're seeing now, and we've seen over a number of years, is the importance of psychological well-being within the workplace. And one of the challenges with mental health, it's one of those things that can be quite difficult to identify. So we know, that this is data from the UK, but we know from our global experience and what we've seen over the 10 years that I've been here in the region, is that what we see globally, we see also similar experiences here across the region. Now, sickness absence in terms of loss, in terms of turnover, is costing UK business 20 billion. And data suggests statistically that what we term as presenteeism, so when somebody is physically at work, but emotionally, psychologically is not present. And the view is that is at least 2 to 3 times the cost of absence. So it's a massive challenge for business in terms of the impact that can have on an organisation. And when we talk about presenteeism, what are some of the negative impacts that can actually bring? Well, it can drive poor organisational culture. Poor working environment can drive and have an impact through presenteeism. What we know from our experience through EAPs is, one of the significant factors that will drive presenteeism is employees having to manage and deal with issues in their personal life, so their health, their finances, their relationships. And the lack of engagement in the workplace as well is a major factor, for presenteeism. And these are some of the things that we have to look at trying to change, for a business to be successful. Now, but even more so as we've come through the experiences that we've seen with COVID. So just a bit of understanding around some of the data around mental ill health, and some of these statistics. When you really consider them, are pretty in some ways quite scary. So 1 in 3 of us as adults will suffer from a mental illness in our lifetime. And the reality is, that if we think of any other medical condition in that context, if we think of COVID, if we're talking globally, then even with the real impact we've seen with COVID as a virus, it is still not, in global terms, affecting negatively the same level that we are talking about in terms of mental ill health as a global population. And so we have to be ready as business in the corporate world to really to meet this challenge and make sure that we can manage that as we sort of develop our systems and operations. Mental health claims are the fastest growing category of disability costs, with psychiatric claims rising the fastest of all. And the key factor there is primarily depression. And the World Health Organization data is suggesting by 2030, more people will be, sorry, hang on, let me share that again. Don't know why we've gone on to that. Bear with me. Sorry. More people will be affected by depression than any other health condition. So this is something that we really have to take seriously. But one of the challenges that managing depression brings is that 50% of depression cases actually go untreated. And if you want to think around the reasons why that might happen, then really there's probably two key reasons why over half the cases of depression go untreated. Primarily, depression is very difficult to identify, and as individuals who may suffer and experience depression, we won't necessarily understand that we are going through a depressive state. And so it may not be something that we identify that we're actually experiencing. But also, as we know, not just in this region, but still globally, there is stigma attached to talking about our mental health. And I think it's those two factors that really are driving this sort of impact that we're seeing in terms of managing depression effectively. 1 in 5 employees take a day off due to stress. And less than 50% of employees feel that they can speak with their line manager about that stress. And I think this is, again, through some of the earlier presentations that we've seen, there is going to have to be a significant shift in the way that employers, and specifically line managers, are more open to dealing with employees in a more human way. And we are going to have to be more relaxed and more open about talking to our managers, being comfortable about talking and speaking openly about stress and about the impact that can have. And if we don't manage it, then again, statistically, 1 in 4 employees will consider quitting due to the stress that they're experiencing in the workplace. I think the other thing to really just to be clear on stress is that what we experience through supporting people through the EAPs is that we're not just talking about work-related stress. A lot of the stress that we see people finding a challenge to deal with is primarily personal home related and issues in their personal lives. But the environment that we're working in is a key factor then in terms of our ability to manage that and manage it more effectively. If we're looking again around presenteeism, I mean, a big factor that is a driver of presenteeism is an employee being disengaged in the workplace. And there's lots of data being shown globally around employee engagement or disengagement. Here's some data that was very specific now that we're seeing more data now being specific to this region, which is good. But we can see, the major impact or influence that employees can have when then, in terms of being disengaged in the workplace. And if we think about it, that's quite a scary, those are quite scary numbers in terms of generally well over half of your employee population are not disengaged, are disengaged in the workplace. So they're not fully engaged in what they're doing. And what we know statistically, if an individual employee is not engaged in the workplace, then we will see an increase in work errors and defects, up to a 50% increase. From a health and safety perspective, then disengaged employees are more likely to experience incidents and accidents in the workplace. Again, we know statistically that they're on average 25% less productive. So an individual that is engaged in the workplace and feels supported, is statistically, a more productive individual. And disengaged workers are significantly likely to have a higher level of absence. So we can see the real impact that disengagement has in the workplace, and in terms of the cost to you or to us as a business. What we know, as I said earlier, from our experience in many years now in delivering professional EAP services, the types of issues that people will engage with our EAP, are quite broad. And this is just really an example of the types of presenting problems that people will come into an EAP seeking support and guidance on. And as I said earlier, not all, and in majority of cases, they will not necessarily be directly work-related issues, but they're issues that people are trying to manage, that are finding a difficulty or a challenge, that will directly have an impact on their ability to be focused and engaged and productive in the work environment. We also know, again from our data with our EAP, is the top 5 presenting issues for us in this region. Relationships generally globally is number 1 in terms of people finding challenge with their relationships with families, spouses, maybe going through divorce, and that is generally will be number 1 globally. I think, from our experience here in the region, one of the concerns that we've seen is that depression, anxiety and stress are 2 and 3 in the top 5 presenting problems. And that's not something we would necessarily see, depression, anxiety and stress in 2 and 3 if we're looking at this from a global perspective. So I think that just recognises and sort of heightens the challenge that that is there globally, but that we very clearly have here in this region in terms of how we manage that effectively. And we know within this region, there is the challenge. We have such a diverse culture across, certainly across the GCC. And understanding when we're delivering EAP services about the different cultures and nuances. And one thing I was certainly, more than a number of people said to me when I first came out here to develop our EAP services, that this region is not something where EAPs will work. People won't engage with them, and Arabic culture would fight against using EAP services. And over the 10 years, we, up to 2018-19, we're getting up towards a third of calls now. Individuals are seeking to engage with us in the EAP in requesting Arabic as their chosen language. As we went into COVID, then certainly data that we saw March, April, then we were over 50% of requests were requesting Arabic speaking support. So I think what that shows is that it's an issue that we're all human beings at the end of the day, and whilst the way that we will deal and manage how we deal with our emotional and psychological well-being may differ depending on our culture, the reality is we're all having to manage and deal with the same issues, life issues that we all experience. One of the things we also know in terms of the impact of stress, and one of the major factors is our financial well-being. And I know there was data that was, I think it was 2019 research. I think it was one of the global broker firms. It was either somebody like Willis or one of the global global broker providers. They were did some research with global HR directors, and one of the things that was quite clear that HR directors globally were seeing individuals' financial stresses being more of a problem, and they recognised as employers that they would need to be looking at ways that they can support their employees in terms of them being able to better manage their financial well-being. And I think it was recognised that poor financial management was driving a significant pressure on individuals in terms of their life and their work ability. And in terms of research that PwC did, then they found that presenteeism drove employees to be 5 times more distracted or disengaged at work. Obviously has a major impact on productivity. Presenteeism is likely to have a major impact on absenteeism, and obviously what all this drives is the ongoing challenge that we see in terms of managing corporate healthcare costs, and that's always been a factor that companies have certainly struggled with, but this is again putting more pressure on the healthcare spend. And what we know from our experience in EAP and our experience in psychological emotional well-being is that there is a very clear cycle and interlink between our financial, our emotional, and our physical well-being. And whilst we manage these 3 sort of pillars effectively, then fine, as a wheel it rolls along happily. But what we know is from time to time, one of these elements, or maybe more, we will find a challenge, and all of a sudden now that wheel will become distorted and will start to move us off track. 71% of individuals who have had a problem with their physical health at the same time also experience difficulties with their mental health, and we've always known for many years that link was there, which is why today people that are going through sort of cancer treatment, certainly in the UK now, part of that cancer treatment will involve psychological counselling support. 40% of individuals who've had a physical health issue have seen their finances take a turn for the worse, and this is where we see then the link between these 3 pillars. 76% of individuals who had financial difficulties have seen their mental health adversely affected. And so we can start to see that once we start to experience a challenge in our life in one of these 3 areas, that it will have an impact on the other 2. And over half of individuals have seen their financial concerns impacted by their physical health. So the challenge for us as individuals is how we manage that holistically. And as employers, I think that's where we're now seeing a challenge, that employers have to now really look at employees in a more holistic perspective in terms of their overall well-being. And if we don't do that, then we have to accept and understand that that will have a direct impact on our business performance. And we also know in terms of poor workplace well-being has a very clear link in terms of major impact in terms of health and safety, in terms of human errors, accidents and injury, and poor decision making. And we also know that it's a major impact in terms of burnout risk, and I know that was touched on earlier. that is, we are seeing greater pressure on individuals that have been managing, not just their work life, but their fundamental changes to their personal life, working longer hours, that is potentially now, heightening the pressure in terms of burnout, and a lack of work-life balance, and our inability or our ability to appropriately manage. And I know a culture of care and compassion for employees. Most companies will say that their employees are their key asset. But I think, the experience of COVID has really raised that area of need to better understand our employees, and show a culture of care and compassion is now paramount. And I don't believe that is just through COVID. I believe we need to, see that on an ongoing basis. And as I've said, if we don't manage that from a corporate perspective, then the fact is it will have major impact on our productivity and ultimately our bottom line profits. And that's why we really have to take this seriously. And there is enough data around and evidence to show that taking a proactive approach and a holistic approach to employee well-being does have benefits back into the organisation. So the impact of corporate wellness and creativity and innovation, increases by more than 3.5 times. And it's really around engaging with employees. And if we can do that, then that's where we will see that the benefits through to us as an organisation and our bottom line. And for me, I think taking a holistic approach to employee well-being is no longer a nice to do, a nice to have. I believe it is an absolute business need. Now, that data we've all gone through, I've just taken you through there, was happening before COVID. So a lot of the data and statistics we've seen, some of them quite concerning in terms of the challenge that we have to manage, was pre-COVID. And what we're now seeing is, COVID came along, and all of a sudden now, there are lots of additional challenges that we're now putting just more pressure on employees' ability to be engaged in the workplace. And what we now believe and know is, this is potentially only going to make those figures that we've seen even worse than we saw there. And these are some of the issues now that we are going to have to, manage. I think the big factor that we've seen with COVID has really been the uncertainty. And I think, what we've seen as individuals is that we're having to manage the unknown. And I think, it's human nature. We are comfortable with what we know. We're comfortable to being surroundings that we're used to. And all of a sudden now that's all been thrown up in the air. And, this is now going to just, unless we make strides and moves forward in terms of changing the way that we might approach things and supporting people in a way that will allow them to manage change and support and develop their ability to be more resilient, then some of these factors that we know and now have experienced over the last 4, 5, up to 6 months, it's vital that we're able to manage those experiences. Now, again, we know through the presenting problems and when people are coming into the EAP and they're talking to our professional psychologists about their challenges that they're experiencing, and these again just the everyday sort of things that people are having to deal with, that they're now finding a challenge. And I think if we look at these personally ourselves, we can all recognise the types of things that people are concerned about. So I'm anxious about going back to work and putting my family at risk. My team here in Dubai, we're still working remotely. With still no plans as yet to go back into the workplace, but we will need to prepare and be ready to do that. I really enjoy working from home. I am more productive at home. Do we really need to go back? So I think to work every day. I think as Alex presented in his initial presentation, the key thing is going to be understanding our employees in terms of are they wanting to come back to work? There are going to be a percentage of the employee population that will want to come back into the work environment. There will be then that 50-50 mix that enjoy or see the benefit in a mix of office work and home work. But we have to accept there will be those that, for various reasons, are not comfortable longer term working from home, and that's something that as employers we're going to have to prepare and manage ourselves for. I can go back to the workplace. I still need to teach my children. That was more prevalent, obviously, during COVID. There are still sort of conversations, depending, where you are based, in which country, around, children going back to school. I think the concern around, all of this is that, we talk about the new norm, we talk about post-COVID, but the reality is, we are still very much within COVID. I think yesterday I heard that Spain is experiencing a re-emergence of the virus again, and it's going back into lockdown. And so again, these are all the uncertainties that we're having to talk about and deal with. And is that second wave going to come where I live? And the reality is we don't know. We like to think and we hope that everything that we've gone through in terms of social distancing, and all the necessities that we've been forced to go through in terms of reducing the infections, it's worked, but if that second wave comes, then we're going to have to deal with that. And again, just the thoughts and concerns that people are expressing to us through the EAP. And I think, again, it's been touched on in some of the earlier presentations. I mean, generally, we've always strived to try and have that and manage that work-life balance, and try and get the scales as equal as possible. When work needs to be done and work's done in the work time, and then I can make my personal life time available, and try and get that balance. And the reality of what we're seeing with COVID is that's gone. It's, for most of us, it's all morphed into one single sort of experience. Home and work have merged into one. I can't remember the last time I wore a suit. I used to wear a suit every day. For the last 4, 5, 6 months, I've not worn a suit. And I think, again, as picked up on some of the earlier presentations, this has brought a fundamental change to us all. In my career, I've been in the health wellbeing industry for 28 years now, and a lot of that time I've worked remotely, and it's not a problem. So I've been experienced to that. And the reality is I've felt a change in terms of home working and working remotely through COVID. It's been an enforced situation. When I look back at my experience of remote working, it was very much a balance of remote working, but also I would go into the office occasionally. So I would keep that, that sort of normal office social interaction as part of my, weekly working week. But through COVID, that all changed, and as individuals, we were required and forced to work from home. I don't think there's any doubt what we're experiencing through the EAP is people saying that they are working longer hours. But I think what has still got to come through in terms of really understanding the impacts of that. Working longer hours doesn't necessarily mean higher levels of productivity, and I think we still have to see what comes out of some reliable data and experience that we see coming out of the other side of COVID. Whether these longer working hours in for some of us in an environment that we're not used to is actually improving our productivity. There are lots of thoughts that it actually could be reducing our levels of productivity as the two have merged into one. So the longer term impact of mental well-being, and that's really the big question. Mental well-being, employee well-being has always been a key factor for us as an organisation. That's why we exist in terms of delivering our EAP services. But I think it's going to be even more paramount for any business now. As I say, I think it's an absolute business need. The reality of COVID, again, earlier we were talking, the new norm, whatever that is going to be. But the reality is it's still an unknown. And we're used to seeing, this type of graph around anything when we're talking about COVID, whether it's in terms of spikes or in terms of, the impact, that COVID has had. What impact will it have in the future? And as I've said earlier, if you're in Spain at the moment, you would have thought you were coming out of the other side, and all of a sudden now, you're going back into the lockdown situation. And so, as always, the challenge will be, how we can upskill our people, our employees, for them to really build and develop their resilience, so that they're better placed to manage the unknown. When we're managing the unknown, we have to accept, there are certain parameters that I can't affect as an individual, and it's my ability then to focus on what I can influence as part of my mechanism for managing the situation. So just some of the factors that we believe we have to deal with in terms of moving into the new normal. As we start to go back into the workplace, we know that some of our physical office spaces will look different. Different organisations are taking a different approach. If we're going into sort of the 50-50 mix of back to work or home working, I know a lot of organisations are making that a choice. So the reality is, if I choose to go back and work back in the office, the person I was sat next to or opposite may have made a different decision. And so I may not be seeing them now face to face and socially interacting with them in the way that I used to. So that's going to be a change. And with any change, that's going to bring pressure and a challenge for people to manage that change. I know of some organisations that are talking about now back-to-back office spaces, so desk spaces, so you won't be facing an individual, you will be back-to-back. While I can understand the reasons maybe for doing that in terms of reducing the impact or the risk of part of social distancing, the reality is that will have an impact in terms of our emotional reaction to that, and the change in the way that we are communicating with people at work. So how we connect with people is going to change, and we need to understand that as employers. We're going to have to be rethinking travel. At the moment, it's a ban, so we can't travel anywhere. That's now starting to loosen up. But again, as individuals, we will have concerns about whether we want to travel or not. As employees, if traveling is part of my work, I may be very uncomfortable with that still at the moment. And so as employers, we're going to have to think about, what that actually means. Are we going to, go back to what we were doing previously? And I think in one of I've mentioned here in terms of technology is going to play a big part, and I know Rob's session next is on talking about technology, but that's going to have a big part to play. We've had to engage with it. My age, I'm a bit of a technophobe, but I've had to engage with technology. But again, through our EAP, we know people that have been coming in that have found, this new sort of phrase of Zoom fatigue, but they are finding that a struggle. And so as an organisations, we're going to have to recognise, while technology will play a big part in terms of coming through this, that it will affect people in different ways. We do need to focus on personal health, and as employers, we need to recognise that, and wherever possible, to support employees in terms of better managing their overall health and well-being. And I think the key thing, not just for business, but employees are having are seeing this and having to deal with it, is that we are likely to go into a long period of economic instability, and that's again the unknown. We don't know how long this is going to take for our economies to get back to some form of normality, or where we were pre-COVID. I think the expectation is that is going to take some time, and as well as that being an issue that corporates and employers have to manage, it is a concern as well from an employee's perspective. That will raise concerns about their job safety, and I think as organisations we have to be as open as we can, about our business and about how the business is, what our objectives are in terms of bringing that business back to where it was previously. Business as usual. I don't know whether that will ever be a phrase that gets used now. I mean, it's we want to try and get back to business as usual, but that links in very much to the uncertainty around the economic instability that we're seeing globally. I think probably the biggest thing for me that I would suggest to any organisation is our emotional intelligence is going to be paramount. So within the organisation, and our ability to be more resilient. What that means is that is going to require a focus in terms of our line managers, in terms of their people skills. They are going to have to be more emotionally intelligent. And as we've said earlier in some of the earlier presentations, there are still a lot of organisations that culture is very much a command and control. Those organisations are going to find the years forward a major challenge, unless they can start to move towards a change in their culture, where we're seeing more requirement down through the organisation of a more emotionally intelligent team, then I can only see that that's going to have a negative impact on business. Unfortunately, my experience of this region, there are still a lot of organisations that still sort of promote and believe that the command and control is the way to manage business. But I think, if that continues, they will find that a struggle. Performance management, excuse me. Well, it's part of the developing our line manager skill set, both emotional intelligence, but also their ability to manage teams remotely. We've been doing a lot of training with our clients around that, and a lot of our clients, we support over 100 clients now in this region, and they've found and recognised that that's a challenge for their management team, who probably in the main have been used to managing performance face to face within their teams, and are now having to do that remotely through video. It requires a different skill set, and I think organisations will have to put more focus into that. And ultimately, employee buy-in. If an organisation is going to come through the effects of COVID and get back to as quickly as possible to some form of business as usual, get back to profitability and the business on the right lines. That's not going to be achieved without getting employee buy-in, and that's going to be crucial. And I think it comes back to engaging with employees. I think the one of the positives I have seen coming out of COVID within organisations is, we've enforced home working, and I think that has meant that a lot of employees and organisations have needed to, or have ended up having a bit more of an understanding of their employees' how can I describe it? Their more awareness of their personal lives, because through video we've come into their employees' homes, and I think, as somebody touched on earlier, your cat walks across the laptop as you're on screen. We've accepted that as the norm. That you're calling into this business session from your home, then we accept that your home is coming in as part of that. And I think if that can continue, that there is more of an understanding from employers' perspective of how their people are, both not just in work but in their home lives, without being overtly getting involved in people's personal issues. And you don't need to do that, but it's recognizing, back to this, home work-life balance, recognizing what that balance is and helping employees to manage that more effectively. The reality is, when we, as ICAS, we're talking about employee well-being, then we really are talking, as I've said in some of the slides, around the holistic approach to well-being. And we look at, all our organisations that we're supporting. Generally, we'll see an employee well-being, across all the pillars: their emotional, their intellectual, occupational well-being, their physical well-being, which most organisations do in terms of absence management and provision of medical insurance, but also our social and environmental well-being. I can speak as an expatriate, and we have a significant number of expatriates in this region. If you can feel more part of your social and environment around you, then you will feel happy, or you'll feel more comfortable about the environment you're in. And I've said earlier, in terms of the very clear link between financial well-being, and as organisations, we can't just leave that to our employees to do that. We have to support them in terms of managing that area as effectively as possible. And what we know through COVID, many people have lost their jobs. Many people are working on reduced hours. There'll be many people have to take cut in salaries, so they've still kept their jobs, but maybe up to 50% cut in their salary. That has a major impact on their financial well-being. So as organisations, we have to take that more holistic look. And as I've said before, it is an absolute business need. Managing and delivering employee well-being and taking a holistic approach to employee well-being isn't a significant cost on business. It doesn't have to be. And I think that's the thing that we need to make clear. A relatively small investment into a good professional employee well-being initiative has major returns to the business. And on average, I mean, this is in relation to EAPs, but there are other good professional ways that you can really integrate a holistic well-being services. But even with EAPs, if you invest, for every dollar you spend, you will absolute minimum get nearly 2.5 times that back. But many organisations that have invested heavily into employee well-being have seen, significant returns of up to $21, compared to the dollar invested. So it doesn't need to be a significant cost, but it can have a major impact on your business and your business performance. That's me in terms of presentation. I am contactable. That's my email contact. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to look on LinkedIn in terms of raising any questions or any concerns or any advice around corporate holistic wellbeing programs. I'll simply now just have a look if we've got any questions. Just bear with me. So would group counselling help? Group counselling, as part of, I'm talking in terms of EAP here, that doesn't really, it's not really there to support group counselling. It's really around individual counselling. What we do as part of EAP is provide maybe group sessions around developing personal skills. So whether that's building resilience, whether it's managing change, and they will be and can be done in more of a group setting. See what other questions we may have. How to maintain a mentally healthy workplace considering current status and for future changes. Yeah, well, I think it's been touched on a number of times earlier. You know, the culture within the organisation is paramount to that. You know, if I'm working from home, if the culture is right within the organisation, you know, I'm not going to be thinking, you know, are people, you know, thinking that I've not actively working, that I'm, you know, sat out or down on the beach and doing other things. You know, if trust was one of the things that's been mentioned a few times, you know, and trust has to be a key part of the culture of any organisation. And I think organisations have to be open around, more open and have more discussions with their employees around the challenges of the business and why the business is making changes. And the more then that will drive the culture, and that will make people much more happier and more engaged in terms of achieving the organisation's objectives. Do organisations provide special packages arrangement for frontline managers, employees, like risk allowance, special insurance cover? Not quite sure what that question is focusing on. As part of any good employee wellbeing package program, then it should be looking at every available opportunity to support not just its employees. You know, I think line managers are going to be key through coming through COVID successfully, and I know that's been touched on earlier, but you know, they are going to be critical. I do believe that there is going to be a requirement for an upskilling for a lot of managers in terms of their ability to manage people remotely, but also, you know, to manage with more emotional intelligence, and you know, I think that is going to be critical. See if we get any other questions. How can we encourage employers to measure the employees' mental health? Good question. You know, the one thing, you know, if you have an EAP, the one thing that, you know, is critical is the data that is coming out of that. And a big part of that data is really understanding what are the issues that your employees are going through. Now, whilst an EAP is confidential, you know, the data is looking at it from a global perspective as an organisation. And you know, you need that data to understand what are the challenges that employees are dealing with. As I say, we know that the majority of those would tend to be issues outside of work, but those challenges come into the work environment. But the more that you understand about, you know, what are those challenges that your employees are going through, then the more you can seek to implement training, implement services, implement support tools to help your employees, to really to empower them to better manage their life and their manage their work-life balance. So there are a whole range of support tools, you know, through to, you know, the presentations that David and Martin were going through in terms of, you know, developing your people. You know, I think that's critical in terms of moving forward. What if employees do not agree with the measures taken by HR to return staff back to work during these days of COVID? How can this problem be addressed? I think that's going to be very much down to the existing culture within an organisation. I touched on what we're seeing with the majority of our corporate clients is that they are being very open about the return to work, and I would say our experience is the majority are taking a very measured approach. They're wanting to engage with employees to understand how they are wanting to come back into more of the work environment. Whether some are wanting to stage themselves back in. I think as an employer, you have to recognise that employees still have concerns around the unknown of the virus and coming back into the work environment. So I think, as HR, as an employers, then it's about being open and having that communication with our employees around, staging back into the workplace. And as a good employer, the more flexible we can be around that, then the better. Got any more questions? Should organisations provide free initial counselling to employees, and examples? I'm probably biased in terms of responding to that question. A fundamental part of what EAPs are about, and they're not the only solution, is around providing access to professional counselling support services. Counselling and coaching is going to be important in terms of helping people come through this. EAPs have been a significant tool for many organisations prior to COVID. We've seen through COVID engagements with our EAP services rise quite significantly. And I think that just shows as soon as we go into any situation where there is heightened concern, heightened uncertainty about our situation, about what's happening, then people are always looking to reach out for support. And we see that generally in terms of engagement and increased engagement with the EAP. But I do think counselling or access to counselling is quite a key tool for organisations. How to create a mentally safe work environment? Excellent question. Do believe it's the duty of every employer to have a safe working environment, not just from accidents and injuries, but our emotional safety, emotional well-being, and I think that's paramount for any good organisation moving forward in terms of a good positive business culture. Don't know whether we've any other questions. I think I've used my time now, Amal. If there are any other questions, you can reach out to me on email. More than happy to have a conversation with anybody. So thank you for your time, and I hope that was useful information.